Hello again, and welcome to Denton's Tales. Now, I am an amateur astronomer, among other things, and this is an astronomical and historical topic I spoke about previously. It would have been some 2 years ago, but I have many more followers now than I did back then, and I often go back to old topics and give them a new look, maybe update them a bit. So I thought this would be suitable to revisit, given, as we say here in Ireland, the month that's in it. And that month is June. Every year during the month of June, gay communities around the world celebrate various gay pride events. But I doubt very much that when you see the so-called freedom flag with its striking rainbow design, that astronomy would be the first thing that comes to mind. Oh, look, there's the gay flag. Oh, astronomy! Oh, yes, astronomy! No, I would imagine that will not be the first thing that leaps to the front of your brain. So this article on the subject of gay-related astronomy, if you haven't seen my previous one, will probably be quite a surprise to you. Gay astronomy, I hear you say. I've never heard of such a thing. Well, no, you haven't, and with very, very good reason. That subject is ignored by astronomy magazines, books, or TV shows. They sort of sanitize the subject, you could say. They seem to think that the fact that there's a gay connection with much of astronomical mythology isn't really very nice. You know, you don't want to talk about that. You know, sweep it under the carpet. It'll go away. And I think that is completely ridiculous, leaving out the true mythology of the constellations as well as other related topics. I have never, for example, seen the correct mythological story of Aquila the eagle and what Ganymede was really doing up there on Mount Olympus. So no, they don't want to talk about that. I've never seen it in any astronomy book or magazine, nor many other aspects of mythology that relate to astronomy. So I thought this video would be rather fitting for June. It is based on an article that I wrote back in 1997, I think it was, for Astronomy and Space Magazine, for which I was a correspondent for many years. And it was the first article on the subject in any astronomy magazine in the world. Well, at least as far as I know. Astronomy isn't as straight as you think. Not that you've probably ever actually thought about it. But anyway, at least in its mythological and historical connections. So, let us dive into that subject. In Greek mythology, there were 9 minor goddesses called muses, and one of these, Urania, was the muse of astronomy. Her name later being used, in fact, to refer to anything connected with it. For example, Johann Bayer's star catalogue of 1603 entitled Uranometria, or Johannes Havelka's Uranographia in 1690. And the great 16th century Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe called his observatory the Uraniborg. But Urania, you see, had another role, for she was also the protector of homosexual love. Yes, well, of the concept of someone loving a person of their own sex, that is, because the modern word homosexual was first used in 1869, and of course that would have meant absolutely nothing to an ancient Greek. And because of the muse's role in Greek mythology, during the 19th century, the word Uranian was widely used to describe homosexuals, which made sense, I suppose, giving us yet another connection with the muse of astronomy. Jupiter is the largest planet of our solar system. It's so large that you could fit the Earth into it 1,300 times with a bit of room to spare, and that's large. And it's surrounded by a considerable number of moons, the 4 largest of which, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, were discovered in 1610 by Galileo, using the then newly invented telescope, which he didn't actually invent himself, though most people seem to think that he did. It was actually Hans Lippershey who invented it. And those moons are known as the Galilean moons, for obvious reasons. They're easily visible with binoculars as 4 star-like objects, and you can actually see them change position from night to night as they circle around Jupiter, the planet-sized Ganymede being the largest of the quartet. Now, in Greek mythology, the bisexual king of the gods, Zeus, fell in love with Ganymedes, a young man of great physical beauty, being a Phrygian shepherd boy in some versions of the tale, and a prince, son of King Tros of Phrygia in others. Take a pick, it really doesn't matter. Either way, Zeus just wanted him, and he really wanted him. As it happened, Zeus was in need of a cupbearer at that time, since the former holder of that job, Hebe, had tripped and fallen while performing her duties. Not good if you want to keep a job. Having a few cups of golden nectar dumped over him didn't do a whole lot for Zeus. He wasn't the most mild-mannered, affable, easy-going, pleasant god at the best of times, inclined to chuck thunderbolts around if anybody annoyed him, and Hebe was probably lucky that he seems to have been in a reasonably good mood at the time. But he needed a new cupbearer. Oh, what to do? And he got it. He decided to combine business with pleasure and offer the job to the handsome young man who had just caught his divine eye. Why not? And he sent his messenger, a giant eagle, to carry Ganymedes to Mount Olympus. Young Ganymedes saw this as a very good career move. Oh, he was sharp, was Ganymedes. Barman to the gods, live in, all expenses paid on Mount Olympus, free nectar, plus a good fringe benefit. Lover to the king of the gods. Oh, all that divine hanky-panky, how's your father, that'd be going on up on Mount Olympus. Well, he took the offered employment. I mean, why wouldn't he? Not that he really had much choice, of course. No, the eagle of Zeus didn't take no for an answer, nor did Zeus like to hear no when he wanted something, and he really wanted Ganymedes. He was so pleased with his young lover that he declared the eagle that had brought him to Olympus to be the greatest of birds, placing it in the heavens as a reward for its homosexual matchmaking services, where it became the constellation known to the Greeks as Atos the eagle, and to the Romans as Ganymedes Raptrix, the huntress of Ganymedes, which we know as the constellation of Aquila the eagle. All this gives us a gay moon, and, well, of course, since Jupiter is the Roman name for Zeus, we also have a bisexual planet, with the king of the gods, mighty Jupiter, still attended by his lover, now called Ganymede. Another version of the story had Zeus turning himself into that flying job recruitment agency, the Eagle. Zeus frequently did that sort of thing in his straighter moments of desire, and he had many of those. The constellations of Cygnus and Taurus representing two of these little escapades, and giving us a couple of bisexual star groups in the process. The former being the time he became a swan to, well, let us say, visit Queen Leda of Sparta. Yes. And the latter commemorating his transformation into a white bull to abduct Princess Europa of Canaan, who of course still keeps him company, like Ganymede as a moon, making a celestial threesome, I suppose you could say, as they all journey together through the solar system. How romantic. I do wonder why he had to turn himself into a bull. I mean, why couldn't he just walked in and... Oh, well, anyway, he did. Who am I to question the wisdom of the ancients? On Ganymede, there are two craters named Gilgamesh and Enkidu. These are characters in the world's oldest surviving piece of literature, the great Babylonian story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets dating from the 3rd millennium BC. It tells of the part mortal, part god king Gilgamesh of Uruk, and his friend, the hero Enkidu, who he loved as a woman, taking him as he would a wife. Though the king also had female lovers, he got around quite a bit, obviously. Gilgamesh was based on a historical king, one who lived around 2700 BC, though the tablets recording his obviously somewhat embroidered exploits date from circa 2000 BC. This is the first recorded mention of a same-sex relationship, and, since it is some 5,000 years old, is probably the best answer to those who seem to think homosexuality was invented during the 19th century by Oscar Wilde, trolling down Regent Street in a lovely velvet suit with a green carnation in his buttonhole. Yes. How fitting, I suppose, that our fictional Babylonian lovers should be found together on a gay moon. Anyway, on our own moon, the dark areas that produce the man-in-the-moon effect are known as mare, from the Latin for sea, though there is no liquid surface water on the moon, and these areas are really large plains composed of dried lava flows, again, easily visible in any binoculars. One of these is the Mare Humboldtianum, or Humboldt's Sea, named for the great German botanist, naturalist, zoologist, artist, explorer, astronomer, and gay man, Alexander von Humboldt, 1769 to 1859, who explored the Orinoco and Amazon rivers of South America, returning with an amazing 60,000 plant specimens. Don't know how he carried them all, as well as making numerous astronomical observations. He explored and collected so much, in fact, that it took him over 20 years to write an account of his travels. Among the named craters on the moon, we find quite a few gay names, among them Zeno, for the 5th century BC Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, who you probably never even heard of, I know I hadn't, and Da Vinci, for that amazing painter, inventor, musician, engineer, astronomer, and general all-round genius, Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, who, of course, everybody has heard of. It was he, incidentally, who first suggested that the Mare might be water, and he may have invented an astronomical telescope of some kind, though no records of it survive, apart from a very vague reference in one of his diaries that he had made something that would bring distant things close, which certainly sounds like a telescopic device of some kind. We also find the crater Julius Caesar, whose very famous remark, "I came, I saw, I conquered," applied not only to a number of countries, but to some of their rulers as well. Indeed, the bisexual Roman general, as a young man, acquired the nickname the Queen of Bithynia after a love affair with King Nicomedes IV of that country. Last but not least, we have the greatest of Athenian philosophers, Plato. Of course, the gayness of Plato, which came to be known as Greek love, wasn't exactly what we think of today as being gay, but he was far from what would be considered straight by our standards either. A man who never married and wrote of the perfection of homoerotic relationships. His Symposium has been described as almost a manual for the pursuit of the homoerotic spiritual path, you could say, even though at other times he spoke against the concept. I think he was a little bit confused. While not wholly acceptable in many parts of Greece, among the armies and the noble families in the city-states of Athens and Sparta, there was a mindset that you had sex with a woman for fun, pass the time on a slow day, or make children if you wanted some of those, but for genuine compatibility and for bonding, you had to have sex with one who was your equal. In other words, a man. Well, that was so obvious it hardly needed saying, did it? I mean, how could a mere woman be the equal of a man? I mean, a woman... Yes, I think we shall just draw a veil over that and move quickly on. The moon was also the setting for a story which was the first ever science fiction story. And it dates from the 2nd century AD. Now there's a surprise for you. When the Greek satirist Lucian of Samosata wrote of a man who travelled to the moon. How, I'm not quite sure. I doubt he rode a horse or went in a carriage. But anyway, he did. He went to the moon. However, he did it. And he found an all-male population. And he ended up taking the son of the Moon King in marriage. A very, very romantic story. But now I'm sure you see a slight biological problem with this story. No women. So how did the king have a son? Oh, well, very, very simple. It's so obvious, really, when you think of it. I mean, they grew children. Yes, they grew children from plants derived from planting a left testicle. Why the left testicle and not the right? I have no idea. Well, they just did. Who am I to question the wisdom of the ancients, or even the lack of it? The planets, too, have their share of gay named craters, and the gayest planet of all being little Mercury. On its baking hot surface, well over 400 degrees Celsius, we find craters named for the ancient Greek playwright Sophocles, that well-known Italian decorator of ecclesiastical ceilings, Michelangelo, American poet Walt Whitman, French writer Marcel Proust, and poet Arthur Rimbaud, Russian author Nikolai Gogol, bisexual British poet Lord Byron, and American nautical author Herman Melville of Moby Dick fame. The craters only carry the surnames, by the way. Venus is the only female planet, and very appropriately, since it is named for the Roman goddess of love, we find on it the only women in our gay survey of the heavens. Firstly, there is bisexual French writer Colette, best known for her novel Gigi. Then there is Sappho, named after Sappho of Lesbos, who lived around 600 BC, the greatest lyric poet of the ancient world, referred to by Plato as the 10th muse, and history's first recorded lesbian. Yes. Indeed, it is from her Aegean island home of Lesbos that we get the term lesbian, which actually only means a resident of that island, just as a Dubliner is a resident of Dublin, a New Yorker is a resident of New York, and so on. So you could say, quite correctly, that every man, woman, and child on that island is a lesbian. Well, I mean, they live there, don't they? To digress slightly, I remember doing a cartoon for a magazine, and it showed a sign saying, "Welcome to Lesbos." And there was a Greek Orthodox priest with the black robes and the a tall flat-topped hat with the veil over it and a big cross on his chest. And there were two very obviously lesbian women. Oh, typical, stereotypical lesbians. And one of them was saying to the other, "Go on, tell him he's a lesbian, he'll love it." No, I don't think he would, somehow, no. Anyway, her name has also given us the term sapphic love to describe a woman-to-woman relationship. Now, unfortunately, the church authorities in Rome and Constantinople, with their usual ever-so-tolerant and acceptance of other people's beliefs and desires, collected and burned all the copies of her work they could find in 1073 AD, regarding love between women as a very dangerous poetic topic. Oh yes, you couldn't have that sort of thing going on. It could have unleashed moral disintegration across the known world. It would have brought civilization crashing down. Two women, you couldn't have that sort of thing. And they carried out their destructive prejudices so effectively and efficiently that only a few tiny fragments of her poems have survived, which is really a literary tragedy, one would have to say. Completing our planetary tour, we come to the red planet Mars, where, though we won't find canals or little green men, gay or otherwise, we do find Leonardo da Vinci once again. Lying between Mars and Jupiter are thousands of small lumps of rock known as the asteroids or minor planets, and yes, some of them are gay. Asteroid number 30 is Urania, the muse of gayness, if you like, and number 80 is named for that extra muse, Sappho. 1036 is Ganymede, and 54 is Alexandra, which, despite its seemingly feminine form, is actually named for Alexander von Humboldt. Now, it's not to jibe at his sexuality. Other asteroids being named in this odd fashion as well, for some reason which totally escapes me. He died not long after his asteroid was discovered, so perhaps the shock was too much for him, coming on top of all the years spent sorting out those 60,000 plants. Number 3000 is Leonardo, in honor once again of the great Italian genius, with 3001 being his fellow countryman, Michelangelo. Now, women are not well represented in the gay night sky, I'm sorry to say, but astronomically minded lesbians might take note of the star Gamma Orionis, Bellatrix, in the constellation of Orion, its proper name meaning female warrior, and known as the Amazon star. The Amazons, that supposedly mythical race of warrior women who supposedly fought in the Trojan War, but we now know that Amazons did in fact exist in that region, since graves have been found in Anatolia of heavily armed women, clearly warriors, some with battle wounds. So while the Amazons that existed may not have been quite like the ones talked about by Homer, we know that Amazons did exist in some form. But the Amazons of the Trojan War were armed with a double-bladed battle axe known as a labrys, and this has become a modern lesbian emblem, worn, for example, as an earring or a pendant, and I've seen one used as a car sticker. The labrys has a strong lesbian connection, since, as well as its military association with the Amazons, it was also the symbol of the Greek goddess of the harvest, Demeter, and lesbian sex formed part of her worship rituals. Well, that's one way to make going to church fun. So there is a gay female connection with the constellation of Virgo, which represents Demeter, the goddess depicted in the sky holding an ear of wheat in her hand. The constellation of Lacerta, the lizard, was originally devised by Johannes Havelka in the 17th century. But in 1787, the German astronomer Johann Elert Bode used its stars for his own proposed constellation, Honoris Fredericae, the Honours of Frederick, dedicated to the greatest military genius and most openly gay man of the age, King Frederick II of Prussia, 1712 to 1786, better known as Frederick the Great, or Friedrich der Große, if you want it in German. As a young man, Prince Friedrich was regularly beaten by his father, King Friedrich Wilhelm I, and forced to watch his lover executed, all in an attempt to cure his homosexuality. The treatment failed, however. Didn't work. I don't know why, but anyway, as king, just as gay as ever, he took Prussia from an unimportant little country to the greatest military power on the continent. And years later, after defeating Prussia, Napoleon, standing in front of Friedrich's tomb, turned to his generals and he said, "Gentlemen, if this man was still alive, I would not be standing here," which is a great compliment from one such as Napoleon. Friedrich introduced many reforms. He abolished torture, and he brought in religious toleration, as well as encouraging the arts, though he tolerated no opposition to his authority. What he said went, or you did. Now, Herr Bode wasn't attempting to gain royal favours. Oh no, he wasn't attempting to gain royal favours when he dedicated his constellation to the king, because the king was really in no position to grant any, since he happened to be dead at the time. The constellation, it didn't really catch on, however, and the humble lizard replaced the great gay king to take its place once again in the heavens. Though representing that pair from Greek mythology, Castor and Polydeuces, or Pollux as he's usually called, the constellation of Gemini has also been seen as the biblical pair of, well, how shall I put this delicately? Shall we say rather more than just good friends, David and Jonathan. Excuse me. From Roman times, some of the stars that would later become Scutum, along with a number from Aquila, formed the constellation of Antinous, devised in the 2nd century AD, and dedicated to the handsome young man who was the lover of the gay Roman emperor Caesar Tyrannus Hadrianus Augustus, better known to history as Hadrian, of Scottish wall-building fame, a genuinely caring and compassionate ruler who tried to improve the living standards of his subjects and cared for the welfare of his soldiers, which is a pretty rare thing among Roman emperors. Hadrian was touring the then Roman province of Egypt with Antonius, of course, when a fortune teller told them that one of the two would soon die. Shock, horror! Hoping to save his beloved emperor by making the prophecy come true right then and there on the spot, Antinous, with rather more loving devotion than common sense, promptly threw himself into the Nile, and since nobody in the imperial party seems to have had any lifeguard skills, that was the watery end of Antinous. The devastated Hadrian mourned his lover for the rest of his life, surrounding himself with statues of the young man. They can be seen all over the place in Hadrian's villa. But initially, he named a city on the Nile in his honor, Antonopolis, declared Antinous a god, and ordered that his image be depicted among the stars. The real-life relationship between Hadrian and Antinous had already been compared with the mythological one between Zeus and Ganymedes, and the emperor was of course considered to be a god, and for that reason Antinous was placed in the sky below Ganymedes' raptrix, carried by the eagle of Zeus across the sky to Hadrian, just as it had borne Ganymedes to Zeus on Mount Olympus. Well, I mean, the mythological symbolism was perfect. Mighty god and beautiful young lover. Some star maps continued to show Antinous until the late 18th century, after which it was universally dropped. The constellation of Aquarius represents our old barman-cum-lover friend Ganymedes, once again, depicted in the sky pouring liquid from a jar, though the nature of the jar's contents depends on the version you choose. One has him pouring water for the benefit of the drought-stricken peoples of the earth. How noble, what a fine gesture. But for those who prefer a somewhat stronger brew, he is also seen in his role as bartender of Mount Olympus, pouring not water for the thirsty of the world, but golden nectar and wine for the gods in general, and his lover Zeus in particular. This makes Aquarius the only constellation that still actually represents a gay person, though, as we have seen, others have done so in the past. And, still up in the heavens, NASA astronaut Sally Ride, who became famous as the first US woman in space, was a lesbian. Now that's something I'm sure you didn't know. I have broadened your knowledge. Returning to Earth, we now take a look at a gay astronomer, Dr. Franklin E. Kameny. In 1959, Dr. Kameny, a Harvard-trained astronomer and a World War II combat veteran as well, was fired from his job as an observational astronomer for the United States government, where he'd been working with the Army Mapping Service, simply because he was gay. But what? You're gay? Go away, we don't want you around here. Oh, get lost. Yes, well, he then devoted his life to fighting for gay rights, believing that what he, a straight person for that matter, did in the bedroom was nobody else's business but their own. He had a point there. He organized the first gay pickets on the White House and other government buildings. He formed the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Mattachine Society, which is one of the first gay rights groups, and he led the initial legal battles against the ban on gays serving in the United States Armed Forces. He continued to fight for gay rights into old age, dying in 2011 at the age of 86. Now, some of the best-known gay emblems are also connected with astronomy. For example, that for a gay man is simply the astronomical symbol for Mars, doubled and overlapped, while the lesbian emblem is the overlapping double Venus symbol. The 11th letter of the Greek alphabet, lambda, is used to denote the 11th brightest star in a constellation. That comes from a system devised by Johann Bayer in 1603, but it is also a gay emblem, first used in 1969 by the Gay Activists Alliance in New York. Perhaps we should leave the last word to Sappho of Lesbos, who, obviously alone in her bedroom some 2,600 years ago, made some astronomical observations, putting them into a poem, a fragment of which survived the attentions of the medieval church. And she said, "Tonight I've watched the moon and then the Pleiades go down. The night is now half gone. Youth goes. I am in bed, alone." So you see, astronomy isn't as straight as you thought. Not that you actually ever thought about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye for now.